Thank you all for attending. My name is Pete Morton. I'm a former U.S. Army intelligence officer and a current security consultant. I've been working in the field for about 20 years now, 20 plus years. I've worked with large companies like JP Morgan, Amazon, General Dynamics, but my bread and butter as a consultant is working with smaller to mid-sized companies and nonprofits, humanitarian organizations. I love my work and have found that just being an operator or tactician is not really very effective without having a deep understanding of strategic and tactical intelligence, especially if you're working alone or on a limited budget outside of the umbrella of the government. Intelligence for me is a moneymaker. If I'm doing it right, I can avoid most crisis events. More importantly, my clients can continue to operate and grow, even if they're operating in high-risk locations. Much of what I deal with daily is risk mitigation, and every so often, crisis response, mostly in foreign countries. If I have a decent flow of actionable intelligence, then I can help my clients plan to avoid a crisis in the first place. And that's honestly my goal. I haven't lost anyone yet. So I have a decent track record of being able to capitalize on predictive analytics, sifting quickly through data, and then using my experience and ability to identify patterns to pull out relevant intel for continuity and personnel safety. So I just wanted to share with you some of my go-to platforms that I use every day to quickly sift through open source information and also disseminate what's relevant to my clients as a one-man show. And real quick, what we're going to go through is, why do we need open source aggregators? How do I vet the tools I use? What is Feedly, which is really one of my go-tos. And so if you're really familiar with Feedly, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be going through that one in depth. TweetDeck for insider threat and protective intelligence, which is going to be interesting since Twitter's going through a lot of changes right now. Ground News, which actually helps me with my own bias. I know a few people on here are familiar with Ground News. And then FlipDeck for those who just don't have a lot of time, especially if you're a one-man show. It's hard to put out, products and things like that. You need the information, you need it quick. So those things I'm going through. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as they come up, and I'll do my best to integrate the answers into the presentation. And then we'll have some time for Q&A afterwards. So why open source? Intelligence is all about creating a more complete picture so we can reach a goal or complete a mission, right? Whether it's keeping employees safe or getting the upper hand on our competition, we need to identify gaps, create questions, and find out as much info as possible to answer those questions. Of course, not all of us have a budget or fit into the target market of the large vendors that provide, information aggregators. But fortunately, we have this awesome tool at our disposal. It's called the internet. Unfortunately, there's so much information floating around that it's often hard to find accurate and reliable sources to answer our questions. So I joke a lot about my time as an intelligence officer, the fact that I never once in my career, 16 years, actually used a secure database to find information. Everything I needed was either on the net or obtained from a human source. As a matter of fact, most of the secure information I did have access to in a secure facility was already on the net. So open source is a great tool to use. What I found, especially as a consultant, was that I needed actionable intelligence and I needed to be able to find it fast. And working on my own, I had multiple clients to worry about, very little time to spend on intelligence products. So necessity being the mother of all inventions, it forced me to get creative in how I collected and analyzed information. The intel I needed was somewhere out there, but to sift through the mountains of data quickly enough to get that intel wasn't going to happen by reading the New York Times or watching Fox or CNN. I needed intel before it was no longer of any value, or worse, before somebody got hurt. There's quite a few paid and free tools that I've been able to leverage. So keeping our time in mind, we have an hour here. I'm just going to share with you my favorites. The way I find these, there are a few questions I typically ask, and I've gone through a lot of these tools, but there's a ton of data collection, filtering, aggregating tools on the market, paid or free. I was fortunate enough to be a procurement officer at Amazon for these products, so I tested more of them than I can remember. I got to see the price list and all the ins and outs of them, their different levels and enterprise accounts and things like that. What I found was most technology platforms have a life cycle. Many of them don't see profit for years after their first round of funding, and many of them, they don't even make it that far. So the first question I always ask myself when I'm looking for a tool is, will it last? Tools that are already self-sustaining past the startup phase are a better option, especially if you're going to integrate the tools into your platform or processes. And you also want to make sure the platform is updating security on a regular basis, as well as offering new features to keep up with the evolution of big data. The more data there is, the more we're going to need to be able to filter it and find new ways to filter it. The second question I ask is, will it integrate? Many of the tools that are available are easily integrated with platforms you might already be using to collect and disseminate information. They're actually third-party or integrators or APIs that you can use to bring one app together with another to feed each other. It takes minutes to set up. I'm going to actually show you a couple of those today. So you'll find something, you got to find something that will integrate in your processes, your current tech now. And the third question, can I use it to disseminate? Because I'm often a one-man show, I don't have time to write a report on every piece of relevant intel I come across. I want to be able to take the information in, add some of my analyst notes or comments to it, and then send it along. And I found most of my clients, they're at the executive level, and they appreciate that rather than a report where there's only 2 sentences that are actually relevant to them and what they need to do. They need actionable intel. We all know analysts that love to hear their own words in a report, but unfortunately, the execs, they just want the bottom line up front, and the rest is usually in the trash. So you just wasted a bunch of time. So I needed to be able to find that information quick and get it to them as fast as I possibly can. So those are the three things I look for in a tool. So let's just jump into the first one, which is Feedly. I don't know if you've heard of Feedly before, but Feedly is my best friend. Feedly, they have a paid and free version, and I'm going to show you those in a minute. I have their Pro Plus version, but even that, it's like $8 a month. It pays for itself over and over again, but they do have a free version as well. The value I get from it is amazing. With the free version, you can create folders. You can direct your feeds into that folder. The feeds can be anything from a website, news media, topic, Twitter hashtags, different things like that. You can even create your own RSS feed from a website. It doesn't have the ability to pull that data in. It'll create an RSS feed from that website. So the information populates in your feed. It's easy to browse and go through real quick. I do it every morning. What's there? What do I need to look at? What don't I need to look at? And then you can create boards, which I use to really create topics. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But you can create boards to house your data so you can get into the things that you really need to look at and kind of get rid of the rest. So let me show you the website here for Feedly. This is Feedly, and this is actually the free version. When you sign in, it populates like this. If you don't have any folders or feeds set up, nothing will show up. What I can do with this is say I want to start tracking what's going on. We'll take Ukraine because it's popular right now, right? Create a folder for Ukraine. And then what I can do is go over to this button here and start adding in topics. And the cool thing about this is a lot of AI machine learning in this. So if I type in Ukraine as a topic that I want to look into, it's going to populate a bunch of different resources. So like it'll show different news media. If I'm not seeing what I want or I want something else, I can click on this. It'll show me similar feeds to the ones that I actually want to follow, and then I can just add them into my feed. So I hit follow, add it to my Ukraine folder. Some of these you'll see it shows that it's inactive. I'm typically not going to follow those because they're not populating the information very often. But like Radio Free Europe, I definitely want to follow that one, add it into my folder. For Google News, you have to have a paid subscription for this. So, but I can show you that with the paid in a minute. Some of the other ones, Interfax. Interfax, I know the feed, the credibility is not all there, but it does populate a lot of headlines, and they repost a lot of articles. So I'm gonna add that in there as well. So as you can see, I'm creating New York Times, by the way. Unless you have a paid account with New York Times, it's not worth adding it to your feed because you won't be able to read it. You'll have to find some of those. But Russia, The Guardian, I want to look at that one, so I'm going to add it in there. Anyway, you can add all these sources into these folders. So when I click on Ukraine, it's going to populate all the different articles that I should be going through and looking. Most of the time, I'll populate it in this title-only view. And that way I can just go through. It's like what's relevant based off the headline, eggs out of the ones that I don't think are relevant. The ones that I do want to look at, I go to this little star here, and I can save it to a board. So I have a Mexico board. I'm going to create a Ukraine board. This creates a board down here, and anything that I think is relevant to look at again will populate in my Ukraine board. That's your basic version. It's a great way to be able to pull information in, parse through it, and drop it into a folder so you can look at it more in depth later on. If you're willing, and like I said, that's the free version. If you're willing to pay $8 a month, let me show you what you can do with it. And it opens up a whole new level of aggregation here. Let's see. So it took me a while to set this up. Once you do set it up, it takes away a ton of time that you would spend searching through the internet. With the paid version, I have a lot of different folders set up. I have a general feed, and then everything's broken up by 4 regions for me. You can see I have a ton of different sources that I've found to put into these folders. And so in the morning, when I go through these folders, I just click all, and I just start scrolling through, and I'll see stuff that's just not I don't care about student debt right now. It's nothing, anything political. It typically will axe, but I can go through this and start looking at things that are relevant to me and what I do. When I open up an article with the paid version, you're going to find that you actually have the ability to add notes to this article. So I can add notes to the article. I can highlight portions of the article. A lot of times sometimes it'll only show you a little snippet, but a lot of times it'll actually almost populate the entire article in there. I can highlight it. Whoever's looking at it in the board, because you can share boards in the paid version, they'll see that I highlighted that information and they can look at it really quickly. But there's a lot of different things you can do. And also, of course, you can just click on it and it'll take you to the link. If I find something I think is interesting, I can save it to one of my boards. So this one's in DR Congo. I'm going to save it to my Middle East Africa board. And when you have a paid version, all your boards that you set up, you can actually share. So you have a link up here. You can put a little header on it. You can determine how people view, if they want, magazine view, an article view, whatever, or just the title only. You can set that up so that whoever you're trying to share this information with can access your feed. So I actually use this feed in my own on my own website under indicators. I actually have set this up to where anything that I view and think is important for my clients to look at, or even people outside of my clientele, they can go to Americas and it's going to take them automatically to my Feedly feed. I don't have to do anything to populate it in my site or anything like that. I'm just looking at it in the morning and say, hey, this is important, drop it on my board, drop it on my board, drop it on my board. It's a real quick way of sharing things. I don't do that with stuff that I'm looking at to get more in-depth an analysis on, but this is just for, hey, it's important. It shows trends. There's 5 or 6 articles on the same thing. I'm going to populate all those so people can see that there's some credibility behind it, but it's just a great way of really quickly sharing information. The other thing you can do with the paid version, you can create more specific feeds. So I can go in here in this thing called Leo Web Alerts. I can click on that. I can follow a company feed. So if I want to follow anything on Amazon, I click on Amazon. I can put Amazon. I can add ORs in there. You can create an actual query string to follow a topic. So say I wanted just to follow my own company, right? So anything that has Morton executive decisions in it, I want to see it. Say I want to add in my previous name because I changed names a few years back. And it's going to pull up anything from my company in the past as well. So this is great for, you're doing supply chain risk analysis, or you're vetting vendors, things like that. It's a good way of searching. And then you can also create an alert. You can follow it as a web alert. And so it'll pull up any information from those companies. You can do and/or queries. You can also do mutes, or you can do an and/or and add in a not. So if say you want to, I said there's a lot of, if you look at this, there's a lot of sports related, especially in Europe. There's a lot of sports related articles that come back. If I go to manage Leo and I want to mute something, so I get a lot of like the sports and real estate, and there's a lot of spam, things like that. Anything that I'm finding is really inundating my stream, I can add the phrase in here. If you look at this one, games, 25,235 articles. That's how much is being muted from my feeds right now that have to do with games. So it's just taking all that distraction out and giving you the ability to really refine your feeds. It also has AI learning. And then you can do topics and things like that. But the AI learning is if I'm looking at an article and it pops up in here and it's not something that's relevant to me, I can open it up, and then up here, this arrow, it says less like this. I can click that arrow and it'll start learning the different types of articles I want to see that are relevant to me, and then reducing the amount of noise. So it's pretty cool. It's a great way to pull and crawl the web and get as much information as you want. It'll pull from Twitter hashtags. It'll pull, if you have a website. So say I'm looking for a specific feed, and there's nothing out there that's already set up. They don't have like an RSS set up. So say I want feeds from my own company here. It's going to pull up my company, and it's going to give me the ability to build an RSS feed based off of that. So I can click build RSS feed. It's going to pull up my site. I'm going to go to indicators, which is where I typically have all my articles. I might have to do actually indicators thing after. Let's do this. Oh, I did put an RSS feed on my indicator, so it's got one on there. But you can build RSS feeds from websites that don't have them. So you can just pull up a website that's posting blogs, whatever it is, and if they don't have an RSS feed, you can build one with this, and it'll pull out that information and populate it into your feed. EU and UK. Somebody had a question about that. This tool is useful all over the world. So I can use it to pull from any source that's out there, as long as I can find the source, and sometimes it'll pull and find those sources for me. But if you know there's a source out there that you want to follow, you can create an RSS feed or a query for that source, and it'll pull any articles or information into your feed. It's not going to pull anything from a back end. That's not what it's for. This is open source information. If you're trying to pull that information in, you're typically going to have to go to one of those aggregators that's paying to purchase that information from somebody else who's collecting it. But you can pull from all over the world with this. You can see in my boards that I've set them up. I have different regions. I have a current threats board, an emerging threats board. I have information security, insider threat. I have my own online feed, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then I have like protective intelligence and red flag events, things like that. So I have a way of putting them all into those categories. And then my customers can actually access that information from my website without me having to go into it and put anything on there in the first place. What you can also do with this, it's easily integratable. So sharing, disseminating the information, right? That was important. If you don't want to put it on a feed, that's fine. You don't have to put it on a feed. You can share it to OneNote. You can copy a link directly. So OneNote just pops up and it'll allow you to share it to OneNote. It's got buffer. You can share it custom sharing. So if you have a WordPress site or something like that, it'll integrate it to where you can custom share it into your WordPress site. You can share it via email. It's just one click. It's already populating everything. All you're doing is click and send. Facebook, LinkedIn. LinkedIn's easy for all of us, of course. Working in the industry, it's easy to share something on LinkedIn, but it's not sharing your Feedly. It's going to go share directly the link for the source. You share on Twitter. Twitter's great. There's a setting in here where you can actually put your own generic canned message in there. Like I put in, get more information at Morton Consulting, and then it'll post the information on Twitter. It has a read later, or you can bookmark it to read later. It's got Evernote, Instapaper, Pocket, WordPress. A lot of different ways that you can share with the paid version for $8 a month. There's a lot of ways you can disseminate that information quickly if you need it. And of course, like I said, you can always add notes in, hey, this is why I'm looking at this, share it out there, and everybody will see that. The other thing this thing does is integrate really easily. So I want this to talk to my own proprietary database that I have set up through my company. So in my company, my clients gain access to this database that populates only relevant information specific to what my clients do. I want it to talk to my database, and there's a real easy way to do this, and it'll work for a lot of different apps and things like that are out there. When I see something that's really relevant to one of my clients and I want them to pay attention to it, I add in the notes here. It's in Ukraine, and then I share it to my relevant boards, Europe, emerging threats, whatever. But this med online feed is what sends it to my database. And the way I do that is through Zap. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Zapier before. What they are is they're an API builder, and it's super easy. And I mean, it takes minutes to set something up. They have a free version where you can do up to 100 tasks on the free version and have 5 zaps. So I created a zap that takes Feedly and pulls the information from Feedly based off the little triggers, like me typing Ukraine into the notes as a trigger, and then pushes it into my database. So that information is populating in my database. And all I have to do is click a couple buttons, reading a feed every morning, which is what I do anyway. So it's not taking away more time from me. It's really streamlining the process. So I created this Zap. You don't have to have a proprietary database you're trying to feed into. You can take Feedly, create the action you want to do. So if I add a new article into a board, it makes you connect your account, whatever. You set up a trigger. If I add something onto my Med Online board, that's the trigger. It's going to test the trigger. Okay, so it recognizes that, continue. And then I have all these different apps, and there's a lot. There's hundreds of apps in there. So if you're using, say you're using Slack, there's a way to get this to push it over into Slack, into a chat feed in Slack. Say you're using Trello, right, for your project management. You can actually push this stuff over into Trello based off the trigger. If you're using Google Sheets, you can push it over into Google Sheets. But there are so many different applications, stuff that we use already. Asana, if you're using Asana for project management, you can actually push that information from Feedly into Asana to specific feeds in Asana. So there's so many different apps that you can integrate these together with. And then, like I said, it's free. I don't usually push out information unless it's really important. It's got to be really important for me to push it into my database. So I'm not typically going over 100 articles a month to do that. But even if you do go over that, it's, again, a small fee. And by the way, the security on all these, I've had to test before through my time at a different company where they really vetted the security of these different apps. So Feedly, Zapier, and my database are highly secure. So anyway, this is a great way to integrate. You can take, if you're on a budget like I am, you don't have headcount and a lot of people doing stuff in the background, you can streamline a lot of your processes and the way you disseminate your information through things like Zapier, Feedly. Feedly, like I said, it's my go-to every day. I go through it every day. I weed through the information that I think is important every day. And you get used to it. It's on your phone, on the mobile. It's super easy. It's a swipe. I don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. Okay, I like that one. You add it to your board. Don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. It saves a ton of time and it gets the information out there quickly instead of having to go through, a bunch of processes and do queries and searches and all that other stuff that you're having to do. I want to open up real quick. Anybody have any questions on Feedly? Because this is the main one I wanted to focus on.
Just one question. This is Matt Hannon here. Is Feedly only for press and news, or do you find that if it's like a threat actor of interest and you have their social media profiles, you can track their public social media postings on Feedly?
You can track Twitter. Facebook, I have not been able to find anything really that's not paid, like a data miner or something like that. But you can track Twitter, which is like the Thunderdome of all social media. It's about to get even more interesting, which I think is good for us Intel people, because if they're going to allow people to speak up, that's great. We can find the actors, right? But no, you can do all sorts of different things. This is really set up. If you look at it, the threat intel there, it's set up for finding cyber attacks and data breaches, that kind of stuff. But for us, doing intel, it's still really relevant to what we do. It's just we're not as big of a deal, I think, as the information technology people. So, but no, you can do a lot with it. You can, like I said, follow a company. You can follow a topic. You can create strings of topics that you want to follow. And it's not just news media that is pulling. I get a lot of stuff from company websites, or blogs. I follow like Antifa. I follow the far right stuff. I create topics around that, and it will pull in the information from obscure sites that I couldn't find before. And for the cost, $8 a month compared to some of the other stuff that you're paying for, it's worth it. We're going to move on to TweetDeck. TweetDeck is interesting. And by the way, it's about to go through a facelift. Of course, there's a lot of Twitter stuff that's kind of up in the air right now, and everybody's waiting to see what happens. But I honestly think, as an Intel person, it's gonna be a good thing for us. Right now, they are censoring a lot of the hate speech and that anger and the threatening online, which is, of course, we don't want that. But at the same time, for us, it helps us find out who's making those threats. If it's censored before it gets to us, we don't know who's making those threats, and they just go to a different platform, right, to do it, or they just go and act on it. So I think it's going to be a good thing for us in the long run. And TweetDeck is a free tool that's out there that you can use to track multiple feeds and really narrow a search. If you know somebody specifically threatening somebody online, if you have say you have a high value individual you're working with, or doing executive protection, protective intelligence, you can follow that individual's feed. And it's hard. Some of these people have like tens of thousands of posts and retweets and comments and all this stuff, and the stuff that's in there gets lost. Like the threats that are in the gets lost because you can't can't see it in there. This actually helps you filter some of that. So you sign up for TweetDeck, it will connect to your Twitter account. So if you don't want your main Twitter account to be on there, then make another one. And now I guess you can just pay for a blue check mark. And anyway, there's a bunch of nonsense going on around that right now too, but it will connect to your Twitter account. If I want to track somebody, so say I want to track a user, I have a client or somebody that's high value, I'm going to go with somebody I think gets probably a lot of death threats, Donald Trump Jr., because I know Donald Trump doesn't have his account back yet, or he's not going to get it back. Donald Trump Jr., I want to see what's going on in his account. I put him in there. I can add him in. You don't have to have access to these people's information or anything. You can just follow them on here. I see Donald Trump Jr.'s feed here, and I want to see if there's any words that are concerning. Well, you can create strings, and you can make these things long, pretty long, as many words as you need to. And it could be and, or, so you can do like kick and ass, things like that to find out if somebody's making a threat against somebody. But you can create these strings of words. You can also exclude certain words if you don't want it to pull in. Like I said, a lot of the stuff that gets pulled in is sports. Sports and anger and violence seem to go hand in hand a lot of times. It'll pull up any tweets on this feed that have those words in it. Honestly, it doesn't have anything. Let's just go with murder. See what comes up. All right, we got some stuff. So this is going to pull up any tweets with that keyword in it. You can go through those tweets. You can also include retweets, exclude retweets. So if you want to see who's retweeted that tweet that has the words in it, the murder, then you can. You can look at authors. If you know a specific author that you're having somebody's actually gone out and threatened somebody before and you're concerned about them, you can put them in here and see if they've actually made any recent tweets or mentioned him or anything like that in those tweets. So it really helps you narrow down any online threats to a client or to somebody in your organization. So that's for if you're tracking a new user. You can also set up alerts. You can enable a sound, like a pop sound or something on your dashboard to let you know that something has popped up within that query. But that's just for users. Users pretty basic. Let's say I wanted to get a little more in depth. So say I want to create a list and track multiple users at the same time. I'm going to make it private. Save. Then I can go in here. So I want to track Donald Trump Jr. I'll pull up his. I can add him into the list. Say I want to track Elon Musk as well. They're all meeting together for a conference or something. Add Elon Musk into it, Kanye West. He's going to. There's bound to be some kind of death threat against somebody in here, I'm pretty sure. But you can create a list, okay, of individuals. It'll pull up their feeds, drop them in here, and then within those feeds, you can actually create the words, things like that. So you can track multiple people at the same time, see if anybody's doing some online threats against them. The other thing you can do, which I happen to like, is just a regular search. So if I want to search Ukraine, pull it up. The cool thing about this, and you can search topics, you can also do this with app mentions on individual accounts. They have this location thing here. So if any tweets that have been geotagged about a certain topic from that area. So if I want to know if somebody's tweeting about Ukraine within a certain distance from Ukraine, unfortunately, they don't let you go to Kyiv. You got to be pretty broad on this when it's a country. I want to know if anybody's tweeting near Ukraine. So I get on the ground information, on the ground intel on Ukraine. I can create that. It'll only pull up the tweets that are geotagged. That's not them putting in the geotag. It's them when they tweet it. It's automatically geotagged from that location. The other cool thing you can do with this is if you are tracking somebody and you are concerned about them having threats, right? Let's do Kanye, because I know he's got a lot of threats right now. Throw Kanye in here. I want to know if somebody's tweeting about Kanye from a certain location. So Kanye is going to a conference in LA. I want to know if anybody's tweeting threats toward Kanye and they're geotagged as being in LA. That gives me a really good heads up that something's going on. This person's actually in the area, or it also tells me, hey, somebody's making threats, but they're in New York and Kanye's in Los Angeles. I think I've added in 9-10 columns at the same time, created a bunch of different feeds with notifications and things like that based on especially events. Events are great, or if somebody's traveling to track high value individuals, and also to track topics and try and get on the ground information intel. Anybody have any questions about that? I'm trying to think of anything else in here The messages, followers, likes, things like that are all kind of based off of your activity. But the app mentions, the lists, the collections, you can create a collection which is larger than the list. Those are all things that you can use to track online activity on Twitter.
Hey, Pete, I got a quick question. Does this TweetDeck, does it handle just standard Boolean logic and then are there any wildcards that you can use?
Yeah, I believe there is. And they actually, if you go into their FAQs, they'll give you a ton of examples of the different strings that you can create. But there's a lot of Boolean logic in there that you can use to pull out the information. It's pretty cool. Hopefully they don't nix this one because it's been really helpful to me to find things before they happen and at least a better situational understanding of what's going on. The next one I go to, it's not a traditional aggregator. But this one actually, it really does keep me in check when it comes to my own bias. It was brought to my attention by the actual founder of the app. She was a NASA engineer who went into news within sports industry and was reporting and identified that there's this huge bias between different media sources where one could be reporting something and the other was reporting something else. And so she created this app called Ground News. Ground News is great. And I've tried to poke holes in it to see if it's, leans more to the left or the right or the center, and if they're being as fair as they possibly can, I believe. But what it does is it takes news stories and it shows you the reporting bias on that story. Now, is that important really as an intel person? I think it is, mostly because there's some stories that aren't reported on at all, while there's other stories that are only reported on by one side. And this actually shows you that information. So it'll take an article, and it'll show you all the different sources that are actually reporting on that topic. And it'll also show you all the different stories about a specific topic. So you can use it as a source verification tool to really add validity. You'll see some stories that only have 2 news sources reporting on them. You'll see some like this one where it's a pretty good in the middle. Everybody's kind of reporting on it. And it shows you that information. It also has something called a blind spot. The blind spot's interesting to me, and it helps me. It'll show articles that are only being reported on by what are considered left-leaning news sources, and articles that are only being reported on by right-leaning news sources. And what that tells you, there's probably an agenda somewhere in there, where one side's not picking up on it at all, or don't want to spread the information, or another side's just trying to push, propaganda, honestly. So it really kind of just keeps you in check. If you're looking at a story and you're not sure about, how accurate it is, or if there's a lot of spin on that story or that information, if the source is not being truthful, you can go here and look at it. They also have an extension. Browser extension doesn't work on everything, but if you use the browser extension and you go to, let me find a good story. Here's a story by Politico. Go to this Politico story, the browser extension will drop down from Ground News and show you. And then you can go into it and see other stories that are being reported on, but it'll show you if it leans left, right, whatever. The way they do their validation, they have 3 organizations that they're pulling the bias rating from. And you can see those 3 organizations. It's All Sides, Ad Fonts Media, and Media Bias Fact Checked. They know that everybody's got a little bit of bias. So they take those 3 together, put that into their algorithm. So they're trying to balance it out even more. But I found it to be really helpful. Nothing's perfect, of course, but it keeps me in check when it comes to my own bias when I'm looking at an article or something like that and trying to pull the truth out of it. And that's hard. It's like everything's kind of getting more and more divided. It's hard to figure out what the actual truth is. And I need that information quickly. And it's really sad that I can't go to the news sources anymore without having to look at something like this to see if there's a spin on it. But it's a great resource to have access to. The last one I want to talk about real quick. This is for us lazy people who don't have time. It's called Flipboard. Flipboard, by the way, it does lean, like the algorithm leans a little bit more, I'd say, on the left when it comes to populating stories, but it's good enough. Flipboard, you can create a board. You can make it public facing. You can make it private. It depends. It's free. It's a free tool. But you can make a board like I have my predictions board here. It is public, so I have a lot of people following it, a lot of viewers, people commenting and things like that. But it's pretty much like creating your own blog without having to do a lot of the work. You can follow different sources. So if I want to look at a new source, I want to look at all things Ukraine again. It'll populate Ukraine stories. I'm already following it. I can unfollow it if I want. I can narrow it down a little bit more. It'll populate a bunch of other hashtags: Southern Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, Zelensky, Donbass. You can narrow down the topics that you're looking for. It's not as intuitive as Feedly. You can't really get in the weeds and create your own, Boolean strings, but you can follow topics. And then if you see something that's of interest and you want to share it with somebody, you can. You can go in and say, okay, article by the Daily Beast, this is interesting to me. I want to flip this into my predictions magazine, and I'm going to add these comments to it. So you can add comments to it, whatever it is. Flip it in your magazine, and then whoever you're sharing that board with will have that information. Real quick, real easy. And on your phone, it really does flip. So you flip through it and say, hey, okay, this is interesting. Type in your comments, hit send, and it goes to the board. But this is, like I said, this is for us extremely lazy people who just don't have a lot of time to set up things in the first place. But it's free. It doesn't cost anything. So those are my favorites. That's not everything that I use. I have some paid resources that I use. But honestly, I don't fit as a consultant, as somebody on my own. I don't fit into the target market of a lot of these bigger organizations, these paid aggregators. They want enterprise accounts. They want the bigger companies to buy a bunch of licenses. And so I've had to kind of just get creative on my own and build my own things. But there's so many free tools out there. There's a bunch of really smart IT people who said, let's make this easy for the knuckle draggers like Pete to be able to put together their feeds and get information. But I wanted to open up real quick. If anybody has any questions about any of this, need any clarification.
So I got just a couple of questions just for my own edification. And that is, you have this body of work, this body of knowledge. Is your model based on a push or a pull against your client base?
So when I work with a client, it's typically at a strategic level. So we're identifying all sorts of different things within their organization, different types of threats and vulnerabilities and risks they need to mitigate. And so when I set up something like this, it's typically based off of where they're operating, what they're doing. I'm not getting into anything other than threat mitigation, threat identification and mitigation when I'm setting these up. But I am pulling the information, but I'm setting up processes to where it automatically pushes it into their feed. So my clients typically get their own dashboard, kind of what I showed you there, and I build those out depending on what they're doing. For me, it just makes my life easier, honestly, when it comes to project management. Set up them with something that they can use to keep track of everything that's going on when it comes to crisis, management. But it also, I can see everything that's going on, and I don't have to ask them as many questions. But I am able to take the information, pull it, and then push it into their dashboard, and then they can see it and do whatever they're going to do with it. Typically, they come back to me and ask me questions about it, and then I'll give them recommendations. But
got it. Okay, thanks.
Does anybody else have any questions?
No, good dump. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
No problem. You guys feel free to drop off if you want, and hope I'll be putting this out. It'll be on my my website for everybody else that didn't get to join to see. But thank you again for taking the time, and I appreciate it. Any questions you have of me, feel free to reach out. Pete@morton.consulting. I'll keep doing these and hopefully be able to give you guys some more information to do things on a budget.
Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate it, Pete.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.